Behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of tradition guard the most sacred royal secrets, lies a pendant that has never been worn by any queen in living memory. Its emerald surface holds more than just beauty. It holds a curse that has claimed 3 royal lives and threatened to destroy the very foundation of the British monarchy. When Queen Camilla's fingers first touched its cold surface in the palace vault, she had no idea that her desperate attempt to secure her legacy would trigger a chain of events that would see her facing the most humiliating moment of her royal life, being physically removed from the palace by the very guards sworn to protect her. This is the story of ambition, forbidden power, and the ancient forces that still govern the British crown, where some boundaries should never be crossed, even by a queen. The morning mist clung to the windows of Buckingham Palace like ghostly fingers, casting eerie shadows across the corridors where Queen Camilla walked with determined steps. Her heels clicked against the marble floors with a rhythm that spoke of purpose and barely contained frustration. For months, she had felt the weight of constant scrutiny, the whispered comparisons to Diana, and the subtle ways in which certain members of the royal household seemed to question her legitimacy as queen consort. Margaret Thornfield, the elderly head of palace security, watched from the corner of her eye as Queen Camilla passed by the restricted wing. Something about the queen's demeanor troubled her. In her 40 years of service to the crown, Margaret had learned to read the subtle signs of royal distress. And today, Queen Camilla radiated an energy that felt dangerous. The queen's personal assistant, Sarah Morrison, hurried to keep pace with her employer's brisk walk. Sarah had noticed the change in Queen Camilla's behavior over the past few weeks. There were hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when Sarah entered the room, mysterious appointments that weren't on the official calendar, and a growing obsession with royal artifacts and their historical significance. Queen Camilla's frustration had been building for months. Despite her official title, she constantly felt the invisible barriers that separated her from the inner circle of royal tradition. The other working royals treated her with polite respect, but she could sense their reservations. The British public's acceptance of her had grown over the years, but there remained an undercurrent of skepticism about her role in the monarchy's future. The previous evening, during a private dinner with King Charles, she had broached the subject of her standing within the royal hierarchy. Charles, ever diplomatic, had reassured her of her importance, but his words felt hollow. She needed something more concrete, something that would establish her authority beyond question. That's when she remembered the conversation she had overheard weeks ago between 2 palace historians discussing the legendary Meridian pendant. The Meridian pendant was a piece of royal jewelry so significant that its very existence was kept secret from most palace staff. According to the whispered legends that circulated among the oldest servants, the pendant had been crafted in the 15th century by a mysterious artisan who claimed to have imbued it with protective powers for the rightful ruler of England. The pendant had supposedly been worn by several monarchs during times of great crisis, always with remarkable results that strengthened their reign. However, the pendant also carried a dark reputation. 3 queens throughout history had attempted to wear it without proper authorization or understanding of its significance, and all 3 had met tragic ends within months of touching the artifact. The pendant had been locked away in the deepest vault of Buckingham Palace for over a century, accessible only to the reigning monarch and under the strictest protocols. Queen Camilla's research into the pendant had become an obsession. She spent hours in the palace library, poring over ancient texts and historical records. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that wearing the Meridian pendant would legitimize her position in a way that no public ceremony or official proclamation ever could. In her mind, the pendant represented the ultimate symbol of queenly authority, and she deserved to claim that symbol. The security protocols surrounding the pendant were elaborate and strictly enforced. The vault containing the most precious royal artifacts required multiple keys, each held by different high-ranking palace officials. The vault could only be opened with the explicit written permission of the reigning monarch, and even then, any removal of artifacts required documentation and the presence of at least 3 witnesses from the Royal Collection Trust. Margaret Thornfield had been briefed about the pendant during her initial security training decades ago. The briefing had been unusually thorough, with specific warnings about the historical incidents surrounding unauthorized access attempts. She had been told that under no circumstances should anyone other than the king himself be allowed near the pendant, and that any suspicious activity related to the artifact should be reported immediately to the highest levels of palace administration. Queen Camilla's plan had been forming for weeks. She had carefully observed the patterns of palace security, noting the brief windows when certain corridors were less heavily monitored. She had also begun cultivating relationships with junior staff members who had access to keys and codes, using her royal charm and authority to gather information about security procedures. The Queen's first major breakthrough came when she discovered that her personal access codes, updated after her coronation, included entry to areas of the palace she had never explored. While her codes didn't grant access to the highest security vaults, they did allow her to reach the administrative areas where security protocols were managed and where she might find opportunities to gather more information. During one of her unofficial explorations, Queen Camilla encountered James Fletcher, a young archivist who had recently joined the Royal Collection Trust. James was eager to please and somewhat awed by his proximity to royalty. When Queen Camilla expressed interest in learning more about historical royal jewelry for what she described as research for upcoming public appearances, James was happy to share his knowledge. James unknowingly provided Queen Camilla with crucial information about the pendant's location and the security measures protecting it. He described the vault system in detail, explaining how the multiple key protocol worked and mentioning the specific times when security rotations created brief opportunities for accessing restricted areas. James had no idea that he was providing information that would be used for unauthorized purposes. The Queen's plan required careful timing and considerable risk. She would need to coordinate her attempt with the monthly security system maintenance, during which certain alarms and monitoring systems would be temporarily disabled. She would also need to acquire at least 2 of the 3 keys required to access the vault, a challenge that would require her to exploit her royal authority in ways that pushed the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Queen Camilla's first target was Eleanor Hastings, the deputy keeper of the privy purse, who held one of the vault keys. Eleanor was a meticulous woman in her 60s who had served the royal family with unwavering loyalty for over 30 years. Queen Camilla approached Eleanor under the pretense of wanting to review certain financial records related to royal jewelry insurance policies. During their meeting, Queen Camilla carefully steered the conversation toward the topic of security procedures and the importance of protecting the monarchy's most valuable artifacts. She expressed concern about the adequacy of current protocols and suggested that as queen consort, she should have a more thorough understanding of how the royal collection was protected. Eleanor, bound by protocol to be responsive to royal requests, reluctantly agreed to provide Queen Camilla with a general overview of security procedures. The conversation allowed Queen Camilla to observe Eleanor's key ring and note the distinctive appearance of the vault key. More importantly, she learned about Eleanor's daily routines and identified a regular meeting during which Eleanor would be away from her office for an extended period. Queen Camilla realized that with careful timing, she might be able to access Eleanor's office during this window and temporarily borrow the key. The second key was held by Dr. William Ashworth, the chief curator of royal artifacts. Dr. Ashworth was a scholarly man who took his responsibilities extremely seriously and would be much more difficult to manipulate than Eleanor. Queen Camilla would need a different approach to gain access to his key. Queen Camilla's opportunity came during a scheduled review of historical artifacts that she had requested as part of her official duties. Dr. Ashworth was required to accommodate royal requests for educational purposes, and Queen Camilla framed her interest as preparation for future public engagements where she might need to discuss royal history and heritage. During the review, Queen Camilla asked numerous detailed questions about security procedures, claiming that she wanted to ensure she understood the protocols in case she ever needed to access artifacts for official purposes. Dr. Ashworth, while somewhat surprised by the Queen's technical interest in security matters, provided thorough answers out of respect for her position. The review session allowed Queen Camilla to observe the location where Dr. Ashworth stored his key and to note his daily schedule. She learned that he typically left his office for lunch at precisely the same time each day and that his office was often unmonitored during this brief period. However, she also realized that Dr. Ashworth was more security conscious than Eleanor and would likely notice if his key went missing, even temporarily. Queen Camilla's solution was to arrange for Dr. Ashworth to be called away from the palace on the day of her planned attempt. Using her royal authority, she requested that Dr. Ashworth attend an urgent meeting with representatives from the British Museum regarding a potential exhibition of royal artifacts. The meeting was legitimate, but Queen Camilla had specifically scheduled it to coincide with her planned vault access. The third key was held by Margaret Thornfield herself, and Queen Camilla knew that acquiring this key would be the most challenging part of her plan. Margaret was not only security conscious, but also naturally suspicious of unusual requests or behavior. Queen Camilla would need to find a way to separate Margaret from her key without arousing suspicion. Queen Camilla's opportunity came when she learned about a security drill that was scheduled for the same day as the system maintenance. During the drill, Margaret would be required to coordinate security responses from the main command center, leaving her office unattended for a significant period. However, Margaret typically carried her most important keys with her, so Queen Camilla would need to find a way to access the keys while Margaret was distracted. The solution came from an unexpected source. Sarah Morrison, Queen Camilla's assistant, mentioned that she had been asked to deliver some documents to Margaret during the security drill. Queen Camilla realized that she could use Sarah as an unwitting accomplice by asking her to create a distraction that would give the Queen an opportunity to access Margaret's keys. Queen Camilla told Sarah that she wanted to surprise Margaret with a personal thank you gift for her years of service and asked Sarah to keep Margaret occupied in conversation while Queen Camilla prepared the surprise. Sarah, pleased to be involved in what seemed like a thoughtful gesture, agreed to help without understanding the true purpose of the request. With her plan in place, Queen Camilla waited for the perfect day when all the elements would align. The monthly security maintenance was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. The security drill would begin at precisely 10 o'clock, and both Eleanor and Dr. Ashworth would be away from their offices during the crucial time window. Queen Camilla had studied the timing carefully and calculated that she would have approximately 20 minutes to access the vault, locate the pendant, and return the keys before anyone noticed they were missing. The night before her planned attempt, Queen Camilla could barely sleep. She lay in bed reviewing every detail of her plan, anticipating potential complications, and preparing responses to possible challenges. She knew that if she were caught, the consequences would be severe and potentially devastating to her reputation and position within the royal family. However, her desire to claim the pendant and establish her authority had become so strong that she was willing to accept the risks. As dawn broke over Buckingham Palace, Queen Camilla rose early and began her preparations. She dressed in a simple outfit that would allow her to move quickly and quietly through the palace corridors. She reviewed the security schedules one final time and confirmed that all the elements of her plan were still in place. The security maintenance was set to begin at 9:30, creating her window of opportunity. Margaret Thornfield began her day as always, conducting a thorough review of the overnight security reports and preparing for the morning briefing with her team. She noted that the scheduled maintenance would require extra vigilance to ensure that no security gaps were exploited during the temporary system adjustments. As she prepared for the security drill, she had no idea that her every movement was being carefully observed by the Queen Consort, who was waiting for the perfect moment to set her dangerous plan in motion. The clock tower of Buckingham Palace chimed 9:30 as Queen Camilla positioned herself in the East Corridor, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The security maintenance had begun precisely on schedule, and she could hear the faint sounds of technicians working on the surveillance systems in the adjacent wing. Her months of planning had led to this moment, and there was no turning back. Sarah Morrison walked briskly toward Margaret Thornfield's office, carrying a folder of documents that Queen Camilla had specifically requested be delivered during the security drill. Sarah had no idea that these documents were unnecessary bureaucratic papers that Queen Camilla had assembled as a pretext for the distraction she needed. As Sarah knocked on Margaret's office door, Queen Camilla moved silently through the corridor toward Eleanor Hastings' office. Eleanor's office was located in the administrative wing, where the morning light filtered through tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. Queen Camilla had timed her approach perfectly, knowing that Eleanor would be attending the monthly budget review meeting that had started 10 minutes earlier. The door to Eleanor's office was locked, but Queen Camilla's royal access codes granted her entry to most administrative areas of the palace. The electronic lock clicked softly as Queen Camilla's access card was accepted, and she slipped into Eleanor's office, closing the door quietly behind her. The office was meticulously organized, with filing cabinets arranged along one wall, and Eleanor's desk positioned to face the door. Queen Camilla moved quickly to Eleanor's desk, where she had observed the key ring being placed during their previous meeting. The vault key was exactly where Queen Camilla had expected to find it, attached to a ring with several other keys, and secured in a locked drawer of Eleanor's desk. Queen Camilla had anticipated this additional security measure and had prepared a small tool that she had acquired during her research into lock mechanisms. The drawer lock was not particularly sophisticated, designed more to prevent casual access than to thwart determined intrusion. Within moments, Queen Camilla had opened the drawer and located Eleanor's key ring. The vault key was distinctive, larger than the others, and marked with the royal cipher that indicated its significance. Queen Camilla carefully removed the key from the ring, knowing that she would need to return it before Eleanor's meeting concluded in approximately 30 minutes. Meanwhile, Dr. William Ashworth was arriving at the British Museum, unaware that his urgent meeting had been orchestrated to remove him from the palace during a critical time. The museum representatives were surprised by the early scheduling of their appointment, but were pleased to have the opportunity to discuss their exhibition proposal with such a distinguished member of the royal collection staff. Queen Camilla made her way to Dr. Ashworth's office, located in the scholarly wing of the palace where historical research and artifact management took place. The corridors here were quieter, lined with portraits of past monarchs who seemed to watch her progress with silent judgment. Dr. Ashworth's office was secured with both electronic and physical locks, reflecting the sensitive nature of his work with the royal collection. Dr. Ashworth's office was a treasure trove of historical documents and reference materials, with books and papers carefully organized on shelves that reached from floor to ceiling. Queen Camilla located Dr. Ashworth's key storage, a secured cabinet where he kept the keys and access codes for various vaults and restricted areas. The cabinet was locked with a combination mechanism that Queen Camilla had observed during her previous visit. During their artifact review session, Queen Camilla had carefully watched Dr. Ashworth enter his combination, noting the sequence of numbers that corresponded to a significant date in royal history. Her guess proved correct, and the cabinet opened to reveal several keys and electronic devices used for accessing different levels of the royal collection security system. The second vault key was immediately recognizable, bearing the same royal cipher as Eleanor's key and stored in a specially marked compartment within the cabinet. Queen Camilla took the key and quickly closed the cabinet, knowing that Dr. Ashworth's meeting at the British Museum would last at least 2 hours, giving her ample time to complete her mission and return the key before his return. The most challenging part of Queen Camilla's plan was yet to come. Margaret Thornfield was known for her vigilance and would be the most difficult to deceive. Queen Camilla made her way toward the security wing, where Margaret's office was located adjacent to the main command center from which palace security operations were coordinated. Sarah Morrison was still engaged in conversation with Margaret Thornfield, discussing the documents that Queen Camilla had requested be delivered. Margaret was puzzled by some of the paperwork, which seemed to contain information that was already well documented in existing files. But she was too polite to question the Queen's requests directly. Sarah, following Queen Camilla's instructions, was keeping Margaret engaged with questions about security procedures and palace operations. Queen Camilla waited in the corridor outside Margaret's office, listening for the right moment to make her move. The security drill was creating additional noise and activity throughout the building, providing perfect cover for her unauthorized movements. She could hear Margaret explaining various security protocols to Sarah, and she knew that this conversation would provide the distraction she needed. Margaret's key ring was kept in a secured drawer of her desk, similar to Eleanor's arrangement, but with additional security measures that reflected Margaret's higher level of responsibility. The drawer required both a key and an electronic access code, but Queen Camilla had prepared for this challenge by studying the security systems during her previous explorations of the palace. Queen Camilla slipped into Margaret's office while Margaret was turned away from her desk, speaking with Sarah near the window that overlooked the central courtyard. The sounds of the security drill masked any small noises Queen Camilla might have made as she moved toward Margaret's desk. The drawer containing the keys was more secure than the others Queen Camilla had encountered, but her preparation and determination enabled her to overcome the additional obstacles. The third vault key was the most ornate of the three, bearing not only the royal cipher, but also intricate engravings that spoke to its historical significance. Queen Camilla carefully removed the key from Margaret's ring, knowing that Margaret would be the most likely to notice if the key went missing, even temporarily. She would need to work quickly to access the vault and return this key before Margaret's conversation with Sarah concluded. With all three keys in her possession, Queen Camilla made her way toward the restricted vault area, located in the basement levels of Buckingham Palace. These areas were rarely visited except by authorized personnel, and the ongoing security maintenance provided additional cover for her unauthorized presence in restricted zones. The vault area was reached through a series of corridors that became progressively more secure as they approached the most sensitive storage areas. Queen Camilla's royal access codes allowed her to pass through most of the checkpoints, but she knew that the final vault containing the Meridian Pendant would require the 3 keys she had acquired and would likely trigger additional security protocols that she would need to overcome. The atmosphere in the vault area was noticeably different from the rest of the palace. The corridors were narrower, the lighting was more subdued, and there was an almost tangible sense of the historical significance of the artifacts stored in this location. Queen Camilla could feel the weight of centuries of royal history surrounding her as she approached her destination. The vault containing the Meridian Pendant was located at the end of a corridor lined with smaller storage areas containing lesser artifacts and documents. The vault door was imposing, constructed of thick steel and secured with multiple locking mechanisms that reflected the extraordinary value and significance of its contents. Queen Camilla approached the vault with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, knowing that she was about to cross a line that no queen consort had ever crossed before. The 3-key system required precise coordination and timing. Queen Camilla had studied the mechanism during her research and understood that all 3 keys needed to be turned simultaneously within a specific time window to avoid triggering additional security alerts. She positioned herself carefully in front of the vault door and inserted the 3 keys into their respective locks. The mechanism was more complex than Queen Camilla had anticipated, requiring not only simultaneous turning but also a specific sequence of movements that had to be completed within seconds. Her first attempt failed, and she heard a subtle warning tone that indicated the security system had detected an irregular access attempt. She knew that a second failed attempt would likely trigger a full security alert that would bring palace guards to the vault area within minutes. Queen Camilla forced herself to remain calm and focused as she prepared for her second attempt. She reviewed the sequence in her mind, visualizing the precise movements required to operate the 3-key mechanism successfully. The weight of her ambition and the risks she was taking seemed to press down on her as she positioned the keys for her final attempt. The second attempt was successful, and Queen Camilla heard the satisfying sound of the vault locks disengaging. The massive door swung open silently on perfectly balanced hinges, revealing the interior of the vault where the most precious artifacts of the British crown were stored. The sight that greeted her was breathtaking, even for someone accustomed to the luxury and grandeur of royal life. The vault was lined with display cases containing jewelry, ceremonial objects, and artifacts that represented centuries of British royal history. Each item was carefully preserved and protected, representing not only monetary value but also the cultural and historical significance that connected the current monarchy to its ancient roots. Queen Camilla moved through the vault with reverence, understanding that she was viewing treasures that few people in history had ever seen. The Meridian Pendant was located in a central display case that was secured with additional protective measures. The case was made of reinforced glass and was climate-controlled to preserve the pendant in perfect condition. As Queen Camilla approached the case, she could see the pendant clearly for the first time, and its beauty exceeded even her highest expectations. The pendant was exquisite, featuring a large emerald surrounded by diamonds and set in gold that had been crafted with incredible skill and attention to detail. The emerald seemed to glow with an inner light that made it appear almost alive, and the surrounding diamonds created patterns that seemed to shift and change as Queen Camilla moved around the display case. The pendant was suspended from a chain that was itself a work of art, featuring intricate links that had been individually crafted and assembled. However, as Queen Camilla studied the pendant more closely, she began to notice details that made her uncomfortable. There were inscriptions on the back of the pendant that were difficult to read but appeared to be written in an ancient language. The emerald itself seemed to have inclusions or markings that created patterns within the stone that looked almost like symbols or characters. The display case containing the pendant was secured with an electronic lock that was separate from the vault's main security system. Queen Camilla realized that accessing the pendant would require overcoming this additional obstacle, something she had not fully anticipated during her planning. The lock was sophisticated, requiring both an access code and biometric verification that would be extremely difficult to bypass. Queen Camilla's frustration began to build as she realized that despite successfully accessing the vault, the pendant itself remained out of reach. The display case was designed to protect the pendant not only from theft but also from unauthorized handling that might damage the delicate artifact. She began to examine the case more closely, looking for any weakness or vulnerability that might allow her to access the pendant. The time pressure was becoming critical. Queen Camilla had been in the vault area for longer than planned, and she knew that she needed to return the 3 keys before their absence was discovered. However, having come so close to her goal, she was reluctant to abandon her mission without making every possible effort to claim the pendant. Margaret Thornfield concluded her conversation with Sarah Morrison and returned to her desk, where she immediately began preparing for the next phase of the security drill. As she reached for her key ring, she felt a moment of confusion when she realized that one of the keys seemed to be missing. Margaret was meticulous about security and knew exactly which keys should be on her ring at all times. Sarah Morrison returned to Queen Camilla's apartments, expecting to find the Queen waiting for news about the successful delivery of the documents. When Sarah found the Queen's rooms empty, she assumed that Queen Camilla was attending to other business, and made a note to follow up with her later about the gift from Margaret Thornfield. Eleanor Hastings concluded her budget review meeting and returned to her office, where she immediately noticed that her desk drawer was slightly ajar. Eleanor was extremely organized and never left drawers or cabinets open, so this small detail immediately caught her attention. When she opened the drawer to investigate, she discovered that her key ring was missing one of its most important keys. Dr. Ashworth's meeting at the British Museum was proceeding smoothly, with museum representatives expressing enthusiasm about the potential exhibition of royal artifacts. Dr. Ashworth was pleased to be discussing his work with such knowledgeable colleagues and had no idea that his absence from the palace was creating opportunities for the unprecedented breach of security that was unfolding in the vault levels far below Buckingham Palace. Deep in the vault beneath Buckingham Palace, Queen Camilla stood before the impenetrable display case containing the meridian pendant, her frustration mounting with each passing minute. The sophisticated security system protecting the pendant seemed impossible to overcome, but her obsession with claiming the artifact had grown so strong that rational thought was becoming secondary to desperate determination. She began examining every detail of the case, searching for any weakness that might grant her access to the pendant. The electronic lock on the display case featured a complex interface with multiple security layers designed to prevent exactly the kind of unauthorized access Queen Camilla was attempting. However, her months of research into palace security systems had given her insights into the older infrastructure that still supported some of the newer installations. She realized that while the display case itself was modern, it was connected to power and control systems that dated back several decades. Queen Camilla discovered a maintenance panel hidden beneath the display case, accessible through a small opening that had been designed for technical servicing. The panel contained manual override switches that could potentially bypass some of the electronic security measures if she could determine the correct sequence of operations. Her knowledge of palace infrastructure, gained during her unauthorized exploration of restricted areas, provided her with enough understanding to attempt a manual override. Working quickly and quietly, Queen Camilla accessed the maintenance panel and began experimenting with the override switches. The first few attempts produced error messages on the display case interface, but she gradually began to understand the logic of the system. The manual override was designed as a failsafe for technical emergencies, and Queen Camilla realized that by simulating a power failure, she might be able to trigger the emergency release mechanism. Her persistence paid off when the display case suddenly emitted a soft chime and the locking mechanism disengaged. The case opened slowly, revealing the meridian pendant in all its magnificent glory. Queen Camilla felt a surge of triumph and anticipation as she reached toward the pendant, knowing that she was about to achieve the goal that had consumed her thoughts for months. The moment Queen Camilla's fingers made contact with the meridian pendant, she experienced a sensation unlike anything she had ever felt before. The pendant seemed to pulse with energy that ran up her arm and through her entire body, creating a feeling that was both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. The emerald appeared to glow more brightly when touched, and the diamonds surrounding it seemed to create patterns of light that danced across the vault walls. Queen Camilla lifted the pendant from its secure mounting and held it up to examine it more closely. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, with details that became more apparent when viewed up close. The inscriptions on the back of the pendant were indeed in an ancient language, and, as Queen Camilla studied them, she began to feel a growing sense of unease about what she had discovered. The pendant felt heavier than its size would suggest, and there was a quality to the metal and stones that seemed almost alive. Queen Camilla noticed that her reflection in the emerald's surface appeared distorted, showing an image that didn't quite match her actual appearance. The surrounding diamonds seemed to capture and amplify the vault's lighting in ways that created an almost hypnotic effect. Despite the strange sensations and unsettling observations, Queen Camilla's desire to claim the pendant remained overwhelming. She fastened the chain around her neck, feeling the pendant settle against her chest with a weight that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The moment the pendant was secured around her neck, Queen Camilla felt a surge of confidence and authority that was unlike anything she had experienced before. Meanwhile, above in the palace's main levels, Margaret Thornfield had confirmed that one of her most important keys was missing and had immediately initiated security protocols for a potential breach. Margaret's years of experience had taught her to take even small security irregularities seriously, and the missing vault key represented a major potential threat to palace security. Margaret began a systematic investigation into the missing key, starting with a review of the security logs and surveillance footage from the areas around her office. The ongoing security maintenance had created some gaps in the monitoring systems, but Margaret was able to piece together enough information to realize that someone had been in her office during the time when she was distracted by Sarah Morrison's visit. Eleanor Hastings had reached the same conclusion about her missing key and had contacted Margaret to report the potential security breach. The discovery that 2 vault keys were missing simultaneously immediately elevated the situation to a full security alert. Margaret realized that if someone had acquired multiple vault keys, they might already be attempting to access the most restricted areas of the palace. The security drill that had been scheduled as part of the morning's activities was immediately converted into a real emergency response. Margaret coordinated with her security team to implement lockdown procedures for the restricted areas while conducting a thorough search for the missing keys and any unauthorized personnel who might be attempting to exploit the security breach. Queen Camilla, now wearing the Meridian pendant, began to make her way out of the vault area. However, she quickly discovered that her unauthorized possession of the pendant was creating unexpected complications. The pendant seemed to interact with the palace's security systems in strange ways, triggering alerts and responses that she had not anticipated. As Queen Camilla moved through the corridors leading away from the vault area, several electronic systems began registering anomalous readings. Motion sensors detected movement patterns that didn't match normal human signatures. Access control systems recorded entry and exit events that seemed to occur simultaneously, and even the palace's electrical systems began experiencing fluctuations that coincided with Queen Camilla's movement through the building. The pendant's effect on Queen Camilla herself was becoming more pronounced with each passing minute. She felt an intoxicating sense of power and authority, but also noticed that her thoughts seemed to be influenced by impulses and desires that didn't feel entirely her own. The pendant seemed to be amplifying her ambition and reducing her capacity for rational judgment about the risks and consequences of her actions. Margaret Thornfield's investigation was proceeding rapidly, and she had narrowed down the list of potential suspects who could have accessed both Eleanor's and her own offices during the critical time period. Margaret's suspicions were beginning to focus on individuals with high-level access who would have been able to move through restricted areas without immediately triggering security alerts. The realization that Queen Camilla might be involved in the security breach was almost unthinkable for Margaret, but her professional training forced her to consider all possibilities. Margaret began reviewing Queen Camilla's movements and activities over the past several weeks, looking for patterns that might indicate planning for unauthorized access to restricted areas. Margaret's investigation revealed several concerning details about Queen Camilla's recent behavior. The unauthorized exploration of restricted areas, the unusual questions about security procedures, and the suspicious timing of various requests and meetings began to form a pattern that suggested careful planning for exactly the kind of security breach that was now occurring. Dr. Ashworth's meeting at the British Museum was interrupted by an urgent call from Margaret Thornfield, who needed to verify the location of his vault key. Dr. Ashworth immediately understood the seriousness of the situation and excused himself from the meeting to return to the palace as quickly as possible. His discovery that his key was also missing confirmed Margaret's worst fears about the scope of the security breach. With all 3 vault keys confirmed missing and evidence of unauthorized access to the restricted vault area, Margaret Thornfield declared a full palace security emergency. The palace guard was mobilized to conduct a comprehensive search for the intruder, while additional security measures were implemented to prevent any further unauthorized access to sensitive areas. Queen Camilla, still wearing the Meridian pendant, was making her way through the upper levels of the palace when she began to encounter the increased security presence. The pendant's effects were making her feel increasingly confident and entitled, but they were also making it more difficult for her to assess the reality of her situation and the growing danger of her position. The pendant seemed to be affecting Queen Camilla's appearance in subtle but noticeable ways. Her posture was more regal, her movements more commanding, and there was an quality to her presence that seemed to demand attention and respect. However, these changes were accompanied by an aura of strangeness that made people uncomfortable without being able to identify exactly why. Palace staff who encountered Queen Camilla during her return journey noticed that something was different about her, but the pendant was partially concealed by her clothing, and the changes in her demeanor were subtle enough to avoid immediate detection. However, several staff members reported feeling uneasy after their interactions with the Queen, describing a sense that something was not quite right. Margaret Thornfield's security team had established a perimeter around the vault area and was conducting a systematic search of the surrounding corridors and rooms. The investigation had revealed clear evidence of unauthorized access to the vault containing the most precious royal artifacts, but the intruder had apparently left the area before security could respond. The search of the vault revealed that the Meridian pendant was missing from its display case, confirming Margaret's worst fears about the nature and purpose of the security breach. The theft of such a significant artifact elevated the situation to a matter of national security, and Margaret immediately contacted the highest levels of palace administration to report the unprecedented breach. Queen Camilla arrived at her private apartments and attempted to return to her normal routine, hoping that her absence had not been noticed and that she would have time to develop a strategy for dealing with the stolen pendant. However, the pendant's influence was making it increasingly difficult for her to think clearly about the consequences of her actions or the likelihood of avoiding detection. The pendant seemed to be whispering suggestions and encouragement to Queen Camilla, reinforcing her belief that she deserved to possess such a symbol of royal authority and minimizing her concerns about the risks of her theft. The artifact's psychological effects were subtle but powerful, gradually eroding her judgment and increasing her confidence in decisions that would normally seem obviously dangerous. Sarah Morrison returned to Queen Camilla's apartments to report on her successful delivery of the documents to Margaret Thornfield. Sarah immediately noticed that Queen Camilla seemed different, more commanding and confident than usual, but attributed these changes to the Queen's satisfaction with some successful private business. Queen Camilla's interaction with Sarah revealed the full extent of the pendant's influence on her behavior and demeanor. She spoke with an authority and certainness that seemed to come from a source beyond her normal personality, and her instructions to Sarah were given with an expectation of immediate compliance that was unlike her usual management style. Sarah felt uncomfortable during the conversation, but could not identify exactly what was causing her unease. Queen Camilla's appearance seemed normal, her words were reasonable, but there was an undercurrent of strangeness that made Sarah want to conclude their meeting as quickly as possible and avoid prolonged interaction. The palace-wide security alert was now in full effect, with guard patrols conducting searches throughout the building and security checkpoints established at all major entry and exit points. The theft of the Meridian pendant had triggered protocols that had never been used before, reflecting the unprecedented nature of the security breach. Margaret Thornfield was coordinating the investigation from the main security command center, where she had access to all surveillance systems and communication networks. The scope and sophistication of the theft indicated that the perpetrator had extensive knowledge of palace security systems and access to areas that were restricted to only the most senior palace officials. The investigation was proceeding on multiple fronts, with teams searching for physical evidence, analyzing security footage, and conducting interviews with palace staff who might have observed suspicious activity. However, the ongoing security maintenance had created gaps in the surveillance coverage that were complicating the investigation. Queen Camilla's confidence in her ability to avoid detection was growing stronger under the pendant's influence, but the reality of the security investigation was closing in around her. The missing keys would eventually be traced back to her, The security footage would reveal her unauthorized movements, and the systematic search of the palace would eventually reach her apartments. The pendant's psychological effects were preventing Queen Camilla from recognizing the futility of her situation and the inevitability of her discovery. Instead of developing a realistic plan for returning the pendant and minimizing the consequences of her actions, she was becoming more convinced that she could successfully claim ownership of the artifact and use its power to enhance her position within the royal family. Margaret Thornfield's investigation had progressed to the point where she was ready to request permission to search the private apartments of senior palace residents. This was an unprecedented step that would require authorization from the highest levels of palace administration, but the theft of the Meridian pendant justified extraordinary measures. The approval for the apartment searches came quickly, reflecting the seriousness with which palace administration viewed the theft. Margaret assembled a team of trusted security officers and began preparing for the most sensitive phase of her investigation, knowing that she might be about to uncover evidence that would have shocking implications for the royal family. Margaret Thornfield stood outside the entrance to Queen Camilla's private apartments, her hand trembling slightly as she prepared to knock. In her 4 decades of service to the crown, she had never imagined a situation where she would need to conduct a security investigation that might implicate a member of the royal family. The weight of her duty to protect the monarchy's most sacred artifacts now forced her to confront the possibility that the queen consort herself was responsible for the unprecedented theft. The team of security officers Margaret had assembled understood the gravity of the situation. Each officer had been carefully selected for their discretion and unwavering loyalty to the crown. They knew that whatever they discovered during this search would have implications that extended far beyond a simple theft investigation. The theft of the Meridian pendant represented a breach of trust that struck at the very foundation of the monarchy's sacred traditions. Queen Camilla heard the knock at her apartment door and felt a moment of panic that was quickly suppressed by the pendant's influence. The artifact continued to pulse against her chest, filling her with an artificial confidence that made her believe she could handle any challenge or confrontation. The pendant's psychological effects had grown stronger over the past hour, making her feel invincible and entitled to possess the sacred artifact. When Queen Camilla opened the door to find Margaret Thornfield and her security team, her initial reaction was one of royal indignation rather than fear or guilt. The pendant's influence made her feel that Margaret's presence was an impertinence rather than a legitimate security investigation. Queen Camilla's altered state of mind prevented her from recognizing the seriousness of her situation and the evidence that Margaret had undoubtedly gathered. Margaret addressed Queen Camilla with the utmost respect and formality, explaining that a security breach had occurred and that protocol required her to conduct searches of all areas of the palace, including royal apartments. Margaret carefully avoided any direct accusations or suggestions that Queen Camilla might be involved in the theft, maintaining the diplomatic approach that was essential when dealing with members of the royal family. Queen Camilla's response to Margaret's request revealed the full extent of the pendant's psychological influence. Instead of expressing concern about the security breach or offering cooperation with the investigation, Queen Camilla reacted with haughty dismissal and attempted to use her royal authority to prevent the search. Her behavior was so unlike her normal diplomatic approach to palace staff that Margaret immediately recognized something was seriously wrong. The pendant beneath Queen Camilla's clothing continued to pulse with energy, creating a subtle glow that was beginning to become visible through the fabric. Margaret, with her trained eye for security details, noticed the unusual luminescence and began to understand that Queen Camilla was concealing something significant. The combination of Queen Camilla's strange behavior and the mysterious glow confirmed Margaret's suspicions about the Queen's involvement in the theft. Margaret's years of experience had taught her to handle delicate situations with careful diplomacy, but the theft of the Meridian pendant required her to prioritize security over protocol. She politely but firmly insisted that the search must proceed, explaining that no area of the palace could be exempted from the investigation when such a significant artifact had been stolen. Queen Camilla's resistance to the search became more intense as Margaret persisted with her requests. The pendant's influence made Queen Camilla believe that her royal status gave her absolute authority over palace security procedures, and that Margaret's investigation was an act of insubordination that could be dismissed with royal commands. However, Margaret's duty to protect the crown's artifacts superseded even royal authority when it came to security matters. She had been granted specific authorization from the highest levels of palace administration to conduct a comprehensive investigation, including searches of royal apartments, if necessary. Margaret's position as head of palace security gave her extraordinary powers during security emergencies, powers that even members of the royal family could not override. The confrontation between Queen Camilla and Margaret Thornfield represented a collision between royal privilege and security necessity that had never occurred before in the palace's modern history. Margaret's respect for the monarchy was absolute, but her duty to protect the crown's most sacred artifacts was equally compelling. She found herself in the unprecedented position of having to assert security authority over a member of the royal family. Queen Camilla's behavior became increasingly erratic as the Pendant's influence grew stronger and her resistance to Margaret's investigation intensified. She began making demands and threats that were completely out of character for someone who had always been careful to maintain good relationships with palace staff. The Pendant seemed to be amplifying her sense of entitlement while diminishing her capacity for rational judgment. Margaret realized that she was witnessing the effects described in the historical accounts of previous unauthorized interactions with the Meridian Pendant. The psychological influence that the pendant exerted on those who possessed it had been documented in several confidential reports that Margaret had read during her security training. She understood that Queen Camilla was not entirely in control of her actions, and that the pendant's influence was making her increasingly dangerous. The security team that accompanied Margaret was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the confrontation. They had never been involved in a situation where they might need to take action against a member of the royal family, and they looked to Margaret for guidance on how to proceed. Margaret knew that she would need to act decisively but carefully to resolve the situation without causing unnecessary harm to Queen Camilla or the monarchy's reputation. Queen Camilla's attempts to assert her royal authority over the investigation were becoming more desperate and irrational. She threatened to have Margaret dismissed, demanded that the security team leave immediately, and insisted that her apartments were exempt from any search procedures. The pendant's influence was making her believe that she possessed unlimited power and that opposition to her was unthinkable. Margaret's diplomatic approach was failing to resolve the situation, and she realized that more direct action would be necessary. She had the legal authority to conduct the search regardless of Queen Camilla's objections, but exercising that authority against a member of the royal family would require careful handling to avoid creating a crisis that could damage the monarchy. The pendant's glow was becoming more pronounced, creating an eerie illumination that was visible through Queen Camilla's clothing. Margaret could see that the queen was concealing something beneath her outfit, and the unusual luminescence strongly suggested that it was the stolen Meridian pendant. The evidence of the theft was literally glowing on Queen Camilla's person, but proving it would require Margaret to physically confront the queen consort. Margaret made the difficult decision to abandon diplomatic niceties and assert her security authority directly. She informed Queen Camilla that evidence of the stolen pendant was visible and that she was required to submit to a search as part of the investigation. Margaret's tone remained respectful but firm, making it clear that royal status would not exempt Queen Camilla from security procedures when theft was suspected. Queen Camilla's reaction to Margaret's direct challenge was explosive. The pendant's influence made her feel that any challenge to her authority was intolerable, and she began demanding that Margaret and her team leave immediately or face severe consequences. Queen Camilla's behavior had become so irrational and threatening that Margaret realized she was dealing with someone who was not in control of their actions. The situation escalated rapidly when Queen Camilla attempted to physically remove Margaret from her apartments. The pendant's influence had made her feel invincible and entitled to use physical force to enforce her will. However, Margaret and her security team were trained professionals who could not allow themselves to be intimidated or removed from their duty, even by a member of the royal family. Margaret's team moved to restrain Queen Camilla when she became physically aggressive, but they did so with the utmost care and respect for her royal status. The security officers were trained to handle delicate situations involving high-profile individuals, and they managed to control Queen Camilla without causing injury or unnecessary humiliation. During the brief physical struggle, the pendant's chain became visible above Queen Camilla's neckline, confirming Margaret's suspicions about the source of the mysterious glow. The sight of the Meridian pendant around Queen Camilla's neck provided irrefutable evidence of her guilt in the theft, but it also explained her irrational behavior and resistance to the investigation. Margaret immediately recognized the pendant from the photographs and descriptions she had studied during her security training. The artifact's distinctive appearance and the supernatural glow it was emitting left no doubt about its identity. Margaret realized that she was witnessing the effects that had been described in historical accounts of the pendant's influence on previous, unauthorized possessors. The discovery of the pendant around Queen Camilla's neck created a complex situation that required immediate, but careful resolution. Margaret needed to recover the stolen artifact and secure the crime scene, but she also needed to handle the situation in a way that would minimize damage to the royal family's reputation and Queen Camilla's personal dignity. Queen Camilla's struggles against the security team's restraint became more frantic as the pendant's influence seemed to intensify in response to the threat of its removal. The artifact appeared to be fighting to maintain its hold over its current possessor, creating psychological effects that made Queen Camilla desperate to retain possession at any cost. Margaret approached Queen Camilla with extreme caution, understanding that the pendant's influence made her unpredictable and potentially dangerous. The historical accounts had described cases where people under the pendant's influence had harmed themselves or others in their desperation to maintain possession of the artifact. Margaret needed to remove the pendant quickly, but safely. The pendant's chain was secured around Queen Camilla's neck with a clasp that appeared to have been designed to resist easy removal. Margaret realized that the pendant's creators had anticipated attempts to forcibly remove the artifact and had included features that would make such removal difficult and potentially dangerous to the wearer. Margaret's security team worked together to safely restrain Queen Camilla while Margaret carefully examined the pendant's fastening mechanism. The clasp was more complex than it initially appeared, requiring a specific sequence of manipulations to release without triggering what appeared to be protective mechanisms built into the pendant's design. Queen Camilla's resistance to the pendant's removal was intense and desperate, fueled by the artifact's psychological influence and her own mounting panic about the consequences of her theft being discovered. She pleaded with Margaret to allow her to keep the pendant, making promises and threats in equal measure as she struggled against the inevitable loss of the artifact. Margaret's years of experience dealing with difficult and dangerous situations enabled her to remain calm and focused despite the unprecedented nature of her current challenge. She understood that Queen Camilla's behavior was largely the result of the pendant's influence rather than her true character, and she was determined to resolve the situation with as much compassion as possible while still fulfilling her security duties. The process of removing the pendant required several minutes of careful work, during which Queen Camilla's struggles gradually weakened as Margaret manipulated the clasp mechanism. The pendant seemed to sense its impending removal and began to pulse with even greater intensity, creating an almost blinding glow that filled the apartment with supernatural light. When Margaret finally succeeded in removing the pendant from Queen Camilla's neck, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Queen Camilla collapsed as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders, and the artificial confidence and authority that had sustained her throughout the confrontation drained away instantly. The pendant's glow faded quickly once it was separated from its unauthorized wearer. Margaret carefully secured the pendant in a specially designed containment case that had been created specifically for transporting dangerous artifacts. The case was lined with materials that would prevent the pendant from exerting psychological influence on anyone who might handle it during the investigation and return to secure storage. Queen Camilla's return to normal consciousness was accompanied by a crushing realization of what she had done and the consequences she now faced. The pendant's influence had shielded her from understanding the full scope of her actions, but without that artificial protection, she was forced to confront the reality of her theft and the damage she had caused to her position within the royal family. Margaret looked at Queen Camilla with a mixture of professionalism and sympathy, understanding that while the queen had committed a serious crime, she had done so under the influence of an artifact known for its ability to corrupt and manipulate those who possessed it. The situation required careful handling to ensure justice while acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances that had led to Queen Camilla's actions. The silence in Queen Camilla's apartment was deafening as Margaret Thornfield secured the Meridian pendant in its containment case. Queen Camilla sat on her sofa, her head in her hands, as the full magnitude of her actions crashed down upon her like a tidal wave. Without the pendant's intoxicating influence, she could see clearly for the first time in hours, and what she saw terrified her. She had stolen one of the crown's most sacred artifacts, assaulted palace security officers, and violated every principle of trust and duty that defined her position as queen consort. Margaret stood before Queen Camilla, her face grave, but not without compassion. The head of palace security had dealt with many difficult situations throughout her career, but nothing had prepared her for the complex emotions and protocols involved in apprehending a member of the royal family for theft. Margaret understood that Queen Camilla's actions had been influenced by the pendant's supernatural properties, but that understanding didn't diminish the seriousness of what had occurred. The security team maintained their professional demeanor while witnessing this unprecedented moment in British royal history. Each officer understood that they were participating in events that would likely remain classified for decades, if they were ever revealed at all. The implications of Queen Camilla's theft extended far beyond a simple crime, touching on issues of royal succession, public trust, and the sacred nature of the monarchy itself. Queen Camilla's first words after the pendant's removal were a whispered apology that seemed to encompass not just her recent actions, but a lifetime of regret about the choices that had led her to this moment. The pendant had amplified her deepest insecurities about her position within the royal family, feeding on her desire for legitimacy and acceptance until it drove her to commit an act that threatened to destroy everything she had worked to build. Margaret's response to Queen Camilla's apology was measured and professional, but not unkind. She explained that while the pendant's influence was a mitigating factor, Queen Camilla's actions still constituted serious crimes that required formal investigation and resolution. Margaret had to balance her personal sympathy for Queen Camilla's situation with her duty to protect the crown's interests and ensure that justice was served. The immediate priority was to ensure that news of Queen Camilla's theft did not leak to the media or public before palace administration could determine how to handle the situation. Margaret implemented emergency protocols designed to control information flow during sensitive royal incidents, restricting access to the investigation details and requiring all personnel involved to sign additional confidentiality agreements. Sarah Morrison, who had unknowingly assisted in Queen Camilla's plan, was quietly interviewed by security personnel to determine the extent of her knowledge about the Queen's activities. Sarah was devastated to learn that she had been manipulated into providing a distraction that enabled the theft, and she cooperated fully with the investigation while struggling to understand how she had missed the signs of Queen Camilla's deteriorating judgment. Eleanor Hastings and Dr. William Ashworth returned to the palace to find their offices cordoned off as crime scenes while investigators documented how their keys had been stolen. Both officials felt personally responsible for the security breach, despite having followed all established protocols. The sophistication of Queen Camilla's plan and her abuse of royal authority had exploited weaknesses in the security system that no one had anticipated. King Charles was informed of Queen Camilla's arrest within hours of the pendant's recovery, and his reaction was one of profound shock and disappointment. The king had known about Camilla's insecurities regarding her position, but he had never imagined that those concerns might drive her to such desperate actions. The revelation forced him to confront difficult questions about their relationship and his own role in creating the conditions that led to her crime. The palace's legal department was immediately activated to address the complex constitutional and legal issues raised by Queen Camilla's theft. The situation had no historical precedent in modern British law, as no member of the royal family had ever been arrested for stealing crown property. Legal experts worked around the clock to determine what charges could be filed and what procedures should be followed. Queen Camilla was placed under what was euphemistically termed protective custody, while palace administration determined how to proceed with her case. She was confined to a secure guest suite within the palace, with constant supervision by security personnel who were instructed to treat her with respect while ensuring she could not leave or communicate with outside parties without authorization. The psychological evaluation of Queen Camilla was conducted by specialists who had been briefed on the Meridian Pendant's historical effects. The evaluation confirmed that Queen Camilla had been under significant psychological influence during the theft, but also revealed deeper issues of insecurity and resentment that the pendant had exploited and amplified. The findings suggested that while the pendant's influence was real, Queen Camilla's underlying motivations had made her particularly susceptible to its corruption. Margaret Thornfield's investigation expanded to examine how Queen Camilla had acquired the knowledge and access necessary to execute such a sophisticated theft. The investigation revealed months of careful planning and research, during which Queen Camilla had systematically gathered information about security procedures and identified vulnerabilities in the palace's protective systems. The recovery of the Meridian Pendant itself required special handling by experts trained in dealing with supernatural artifacts. The pendant was examined by scholars and security specialists who confirmed that it had indeed been activated by Queen Camilla's unauthorized possession and had exerted the psychological influence described in historical accounts. The examination also revealed new details about the pendant's properties that had not been previously understood. Palace historians were consulted to research previous incidents involving the Meridian Pendant and to provide context for understanding Queen Camilla's actions. The historical research revealed that every previous unauthorized possessor of the pendant had exhibited similar patterns of behavior, including increased ambition, reduced judgment, and desperate resistance to giving up the artifact. The decision about whether to prosecute Queen Camilla criminally became the subject of intense debate within palace administration. While her crimes were serious and well-documented, prosecution would inevitably become public and could damage the monarchy's reputation at a time when public support was crucial for the institution's survival. The alternative of handling the matter internally raised questions about whether justice would truly be served. King Charles faced the most difficult decision of his reign as he considered how to respond to his wife's betrayal. The personal and political implications of Queen Camilla's actions created a crisis that threatened both their marriage and the stability of the monarchy. Charles had to balance his love for Camilla with his duty to the crown and the British people. The media began to sense that something significant was happening within the palace as rumors of increased security activity and canceled royal engagements started to circulate. Palace press officers worked frantically to maintain the official schedule and provide plausible explanations for any changes that might indicate a crisis was unfolding behind the scenes. Queen Camilla's children from her previous marriage were quietly informed of the situation and asked to maintain absolute confidentiality while the palace determined how to proceed. The family members were shocked by the news and struggled to understand how someone they thought they knew well could have committed such acts. The international implications of Queen Camilla's theft became apparent as security agencies briefed their governments on the potential impact of a scandal involving the British royal family. Allied nations expressed concern about the stability of their relationships with the UK if the monarchy faced a serious crisis that might affect the country's political leadership. Margaret Thornfield found herself at the center of a media management effort designed to prevent details of the investigation from leaking to the press. Her team was expanded to include specialists in information security and counterintelligence, reflecting the serious threat that unauthorized disclosure could pose to both the investigation and the monarchy's reputation. The Meridian Pendant was returned to secure storage under enhanced security measures that incorporated lessons learned from Queen Camilla's successful theft. New protocols were established requiring multiple layers of authorization for any access to the most sensitive royal artifacts, and the physical security of the storage areas was significantly upgraded. Palace staff who had interacted with Queen Camilla during her planning and execution of the theft were interviewed extensively to determine what signs of her deteriorating judgment might have been missed. The interviews revealed that Queen Camilla had been skilled at hiding her true intentions and maintaining her public facade even while planning her crime. The psychological impact of the theft on Queen Camilla became more apparent as the days passed, and she remained in custody. Without the pendant's influence, she was forced to confront not only her actions but also the underlying insecurities and resentments that had made her vulnerable to its corruption. The realization that she had risked everything for an artifact that had ultimately controlled rather than empowered her was devastating. Margaret Thornfield's final report on the theft investigation was a comprehensive document that detailed every aspect of Queen Camilla's plan and execution of the crime. The report included recommendations for security improvements and protocols for preventing similar incidents in the future. However, Margaret understood that the most important lesson was that even members of the royal family were not immune to the corrupting influence of power and ambition. The decision about Queen Camilla's fate ultimately rested with King Charles, who had to choose between justice and mercy, between public accountability and private forgiveness. The choice would define not only Queen Camilla's future, but also the character of his reign and the monarchy's relationship with the British people. In the end, the sight that would remain burned into Margaret Thornfield's memory was not the moment of Queen Camilla's arrest or the recovery of the stolen pendant, but the look of profound loss and regret in the Queen's eyes as she realized that her desperate attempt to secure her legacy had instead destroyed it. The royal guard who had devoted her life to protecting the crown had been forced to protect it from one of its own members, a duty that was both necessary and heartbreaking. Queen Camilla's removal from the palace occurred in the pre-dawn hours of the following day, conducted with the same secrecy and efficiency that had characterized the entire investigation. As she was escorted to a waiting vehicle by the same guards who had once protected her, Queen Camilla understood that she was leaving behind not just a building, but an entire life that she had fought so hard to claim and had lost through her own choices. The Meridian pendant remained in its secure vault, its dark influence contained but not destroyed, waiting for the next person who might be tempted to claim its power. The legend of the pendant had gained another chapter, a modern tale of ambition, corruption, and the price of forbidden desire that would serve as a warning for future generations about the dangers that lurked even within the most sacred institutions of the realm.